Hey guys, today we're back with another video, and today we'll be reacting to Kairos Time's video, shout out to him, on his Brawl Stars tier list of all the brawlers. Now, I have recently done a video on this, so let's just see how his compares to mine. Shout out Kairos Time for the video, and let's begin.
It is finally time for the tier list, version 42. I know it's a little bit late, but that's because balance changes weren't actually until after the World Championship. But now the pros have been able to test out the meta, and as always, their feedback was incredibly helpful in making this tier list. I only made one of these placements. Every other placement was made by the pros. So here's every brawler ranked from worst to best. Kicking us off in the F tier, Hank. No changes were made to Hank this season, and he has now taken Doug's place as the worst brawler in the game. Bonnie is moving from the D tier down into the F tier. Might be a little bit unfair to put Bonnie in the F tier, but her stats are just so weak right now, and there are so many other brawlers that are just better options in literally every situation. Doug is staying in the F tier. He didn't get buffed. I know we're moving him up from the worst brawler, but he has a 100% win rate at the World Championship, so I guess, say what you will, Doug. I don't even want to call him usable, but the pros were... Anyway, he's still pretty bad. Next to the D-tier brawlers, also not great options. Probably not even the pros are going to be playing these most of the time. Mr. P is staying in the D-tier. Very similar to Bonnie, Mr. P is just really weak, so there's usually better options, but he's still a decent counter to a few brawlers, so keep him in mind, but not like, you know, in the back of your mind. Oh, Edgar's going from C-tier down to the D-tier. Edgar is slowly going back to being one of the easiest brawlers in the game to counter, as there are more and more brawlers that get hypercharges that make Edgar struggle a little bit. Keep in mind that this is for the competitive meta. Edgar's actually really good in lower metas, lower trophies when people don't know how to counter him, but later on he gets really bad. Next is Grom staying in the D tier. Grom's probably the easiest thrower to dodge, and now there are enough throwers in the game that he's almost never used competitively. Bull is moving from the C tier down into the D tier. More top brawlers this season counter Bull really well, so he's just barely being used right now. Janet is staying in the D tier. She's another brawler with really weak stats, but her kit has always been solid, so I think that she'll like get a lot better once she actually gets a hypercharge. Okay, next we got the C tier brawlers. These ones are also not like very competitive, except for in the extreme cases, but they're not very great at the moment. Brock is moved from the D tier up into the C tier. Brock's range and DPS are enough to keep him out of the D tier, but his shots are just really easy for good players to dodge, so there are better sharpshooters at the moment. The small buff to his health has also made him a little bit better, just nowhere near the best. Rosa is staying in the C tier. As usual, she's a decent brawler, but there are several other tanks in the game that just do her job better than she does. Jackie is staying in the C tier. She's also not as good as other tanks, and it's also slightly easier to counter her now than before. Fang is moving from the B tier down into the C tier. My boy, he is getting countered by tons of top brawlers right now and is being used way less. Oh my gosh, Dynamite is moving from the A tier down into the C tier. Dynamite is sort of being power crept by other throwers, and the current meta has a lot of brawlers with good mobility, so he can't land shots nearly as much. Colt is staying in the C tier. Colt is basically only used for heist these days because he has some of the highest DPS in the game, and all of his bullets can easily hit the safe, unlike, you know, skillful players where all of his bullets rarely hit them. Chuck is staying in the C tier. Chuck is also exclusively good for heist, and he's probably slightly more useless than Colt in other game modes, right? But at least he's slightly better than Colt in heist where he's used. Miko is staying in the C tier. He's still very debatable, even among the pros. Some of them even put him in the F tier. Honestly though, I think that when it comes down to all their feedback, it depends on how good you are at timing his jumps, and the pros are very good at that, so he's not used very much competitively because other pros are able to, you know, attack when he's going to be landing. Draco is staying in the C tier. He actually might be a little underrated here because his super is actually pretty good, but he usually has to feed a lot of super to the enemy before he can charge up his super himself because he's close to them, and you get the idea. Eve is also staying in the C tier. She's one of several brawlers on this list that has just really weak stats, but will become significantly better with a hypercharge, I think. Bo is staying in the C tier. We lost the F tier, I'll get him back. Now that everybody's getting hypercharges that increase movement speed, Bo's mines are getting slightly easier to avoid for everyone, and without his mines, he's really just not super strong, so the C tier makes sense for him. BB is staying in the C tier. She really struggles against brawlers that can stun, knock back, or just stay out of her range, so she's slightly worse right now than she was in the last update. Buzz is moving from the B tier tier down into the C tier. Buzz is another tank that has been hurt by this meta particularly worse than others, mostly for the same reason that BB has been. El Primo is staying in the C tier. There haven't been any major changes for El Primo, and while he's getting countered a lot, his super will always make him at least usable in some situations. So C tier makes sense for him at the moment. Sam is moving from the B tier down into the C tier. Sam is another brawler like Buzz and BB, and with no buffs this update, he's just being played a lot less. Leon is moving from the B tier down to the very top of the C tier. Despite Leon's long-ranged attack, he's obviously much more of a close-range brawler, and as we've already seen, the top brawlers are making it tough to play any close-range brawlers other than like the absolute best, right? Now it is time for the B tier brawlers. These ones are competitive, though they're not as strong as the A tier or the S tiers. They're usually best for specific game modes to counter specific brawlers, or they're just competitive because they're all-rounders. Maisie is moving from the C tier up into the B tier. She's actually better now than before because she's a decent counter to the best close-range brawlers and still has enough range for other brawlers as well. Nani is staying in the B tier. Nani has one of the weakest hypercharges in the game, but there aren't many brawlers that outrange her, so on an open map, she's still decent if you have pretty good aim.
Falkland celebration sweat. Oh, Blue Star, how fixing.
Shelly is staying in the B tier. Nothing changed for Shelly. She's still only used to counter other brawlers with close range, so she's staying in B. Pam is staying in the B tier as well. She's remained in the B tier now for a while, even without a hypercharge, which makes me think that she'll actually be really good once she does eventually get one. But for now, she stays in the B tier. Mortis is moving from the S tier down into the B tier. Mortis's hypercharge kind of broke the game when it was released, and even though Mortis is pretty easy to counter, it's still one of the most game-changing hypercharges in the game. But then the charging rate of his hypercharge decreased, and that toned him down quite a bit. Pearl is staying in the B tier. Pearl's hypercharge is not very good, and she doesn't have the most range, but her damage output is still pretty high, and she can basically assassinate people with her gadget, making her actually a pretty survivable tank to play in Knockout. Griff is staying in the B tier. Very similar to Pam, Griff has been a decent brawler for a long time, and I think that he may even be better than Pam once he gets his hypercharge, since he has one of the best supers in the game. I love playing Griff. I can't wait for him to get a hypercharge. Ems is staying in the B tier. The biggest thing keeping Ems from being in the higher tier is that she doesn't quite have enough range. She plays very well into any brawler with a shorter range than her though, so she stays in the B tier. Terra is staying in the B tier. Same thing about Ems can also be applied to Terra, right? Except Terra's super can be a lot more devastating, especially if it's hypercharged. Chester is moving from the S tier down into the B tier. Chester's first star power got nerfed last update, and it really made a lot of difference for him. He's still a decently strong brawler, especially against close range brawlers, but he's no longer one of the best. Colette is staying in the B tier. She is still one of the best tank counters in the game, but she's not too great against other brawlers. On top of that, she's really only being played in Heist, where she can easily get full value out of her hypercharge. Charlie's moving from the C tier up into the B tier. She received a damage buff to her attack, and while she's still not broken like she used to be, she's actually playable now. Crow is staying in the B tier. No balance changes were made to Crow. He's become pretty map dependent since he's the best at checking grass. His hypercharge has also made him a good Heist brawler, but still not top tier. Lola is staying in the B tier. Her attack is easy to use, she can deal lots of damage, and she actually has some pretty good range. Her super just adds to all of that, so she's still not the best brawler, but you can't really go wrong with her. Barry is staying in the B tier. Barry is a very supportive thrower, so how good he is depends a lot on what his comp is and the map that he's playing on. While he can be just like an absolutely amazing choice in certain situations, he's not as good as other throwers just by himself. Jessie's moving from the A tier down into the B tier. She didn't get nerfed at all, but I guess the way that the meta has shifted just kind of hurt Jessie pretty bad due to some of the top brawlers being able to just really easily deal with her turret. Squeak is staying in the B tier. Squeak honestly might deserve to be higher on this list because of how well he controls his lanes, but he's just too weak to aggressive brawlers for him to be a safe choice. B is moving from the C tier up into the B tier. Currently the best aggressive brawlers don't play as well into B, so she's significantly better than the last update despite getting nerfed. Mandy is moving from the A tier down into the B tier. Mandy's another brawler that is pretty map dependent, and along with the new meta, she's not being played nearly as much as other long range brawlers. Meg is moving from the S tier all the way down to the B tier. She had to be nerfed a few times after her recent rework to her attack, and now she is finally back to being an average brawler, which is just fine with me. Lou is staying in the B tier. Lou still has one of the best hypercharges in the game, but his main attack is kind of hard to land, and his super is only good on certain modes and maps. Willow is moving from the C tier up into the B tier. She's become a pretty good thrower in this meta since her super can protect her from close range brawlers, but both her super and her main attack can be hard to land, so there's usually better thrower options. Melody is staying in the B tier. Nothing's changed for Melody, she's still only being used competitively in Heist. Poco is staying in the B tier. He's still a good healer, but there are just better healers right now, so there isn't a huge need for Poco at the moment. Belle is staying in the B tier. Belle is a fine sharpshooter, but most others do a lot more damage than she does, and she doesn't really have a way to safely get away from assassins that get too close to her. Her gadget can help, but there's just better options. Spike is staying in the B tier. Spike actually got a buff to his health, and it made him slightly better, just not quite enough to move him up a whole other tier. Carl is staying in the B tier. He didn't receive any balance changes, and the meta hasn't really affected how much he's being played at all. Sandy is moving from the A tier down into the B tier. Sandy has one of the strongest supers in the game, but he's only good on some maps, and he's basically useless in some game modes like Bounty and Knockout, so he's become a pretty conditional brawler to use. Lily's moving from the A tier down into the B tier. Lily's gadget is one of the best gadgets in the game, but even with how well she's able to get close to enemies, she gets countered pretty hard by certain brawlers that are being used a lot right now. Kit is moving from the A tier down into the B tier. How good Kit is almost entirely depends on which brawlers are on his team. He can actually do pretty well on his own with his cardboard box gadget, but once he runs out of those, he really can't do very much without help. Tick is moving from the A tier down to the B tier. This is a blessing, am I right? A lot of Tick's biggest counters are at the top of this tier list, so he's being played a lot less right now. Sprout is staying in the B tier. Sprout is still only good on certain maps, and it might even be used slightly less right now because there are better throwers in general. Gray is staying in the B tier. Gray's stats are relatively weak, but he's still at least B tier because his super can make certain comps like just so hard to deal with. RT is staying in the B tier. RT recently had a rework that allowed him to hover over water when he's split, but it doesn't seem to have made him any better. So that's interesting. 8-Bit is staying in the B tier. 8-Bit got a new hypercharge this update, but it still doesn't seem to have made him an A tier brawler. That being said, he's a pretty safe choice and makes a lot of other brawlers a lot stronger. Cordelius is moved from the A tier down into the B tier. Cordelius might also be higher on this list if you can create favorable 2v2s for your teammates, but he's getting worse because more and more brawlers are becoming able to survive the Shadow Realm. Okay, now we got the A tier brawlers. These ones are very competitive, just not quite as strong as the S tier. But you can play a lot of these brawlers in a lot of different situations and do just fine. Kicking us off, we've got Buster staying in the A tier. Buster is slightly being power crept each update, but he's still an A tier brawler, and I think that he's going to be broken again once he gets a hypercharge. Nita is moving from the B tier up into the A tier. Nita's only good on certain maps and modes, but she is a huge counter to a lot of good brawlers, and even brawlers that counter her have a hard time getting rid of a hypercharged bear. It's just so tanky. Otis is moving from the B tier up into the A tier. Otis received his hypercharges update, and since he's always been a decent brawler, he is now a very safe choice almost everywhere. Clancy is staying in the A tier. Clancy got nerfed hard, and honestly, it might be too early to tell exactly how much worse he is now from those nerfs. Clancy at level 3 is definitely still S tier, but it's not quite as good, and it's even more difficult to get there now. Barley is staying in the A tier. Nothing's really changed for Barley, so he's still one of the best throwers on maps with lots of walls. Ash, oh my gosh, he's moving from the D tier all the way up into the A tier. Ash receives a small buff to the amount of rage that he gets when taking damage, but I guess it's made a world of difference for him, and the old Ash healer combo is really making a comeback right now. Rico is staying in the A tier. No changes were made for Rico, and thanks to his gadget and hypercharge, you really can't go wrong on any map selecting Rico. Gale is moving from the S tier down to the A tier. Gale's nerf from last update almost pushed him out of the S tier, and this most recent nerf was enough to finally put him in the A tier. He's still a great option for countering aggressive brawlers though, so definitely pick him if you have that pop up in ranked. Gene is staying in the A tier. Gene didn't receive any balance changes, and the new meta hasn't really moved him around at all. Ruffs is actually moving from the B tier up into the A tier. Ruffs' new hypercharge easily makes him an A tier brawler, and even S tier might be debatable depending on which brawlers are on his team. Piper is staying in the A tier. Piper's still one of the most solid sharpshooters in the game, not only because of her damage at long range, but also because of her ability to break walls and keep away from close range brawlers. Amber is staying in the A tier. No changes were made to Amber, and she's another brawler that you really just can't go wrong with, and she's relatively easy to use. You just hold down that auto aim. Larry and Laurie are staying in the A tier. Larry and Laurie have been nerfed yet again, and they are still so good. They deal insane damage, they offer tons of map control, and unlike a lot of other throwers, they can shred through enemies at close range. Angelo is staying in the A tier. Angelo is another very good sharpshooter, and the things that really set them apart from others is their high movement speed and their ability to hover over water. Byron is staying in the A tier. Byron is probably the best brawler in the game right now for healing teammates, and he also has the damage and range to do well all by himself. Frank is staying in the A tier. Frank has received quite a few nerfs since his rework, and this update was no different. Surprisingly, he's still debatably S tier according to a few of the pros. Penny is moving from the B tier up into the A tier. Penny's hypercharge in the recent buff to her range has made her way better and is now being played competitively again. I've been really enjoying playing Penny a lot. Max is staying in the A tier. Max has always been a great brawler, but what determines exactly how great she is usually depends on the rest of her brawlers and support from those top tier brawlers. That being said, she's a little bit better now than the previous update. But now we have the S tier brawlers. These are the best of the best. They are usually competitive on every map, every mode, no matter what's going on. They're good options to ban a lot of the time as well. Stu is moving from the B tier all the way up into the S tier. Stu's hypercharge alone instantly put him in the S tier because he's basically invincible while using it with his Gasso Heal star power. Gus is moving from the A tier up into the S tier. We saw a lot of Gus played during the World Championship, mostly because of how much stronger his super makes the aggressive brawlers on his team. He also has enough range to hold his own against just about any other brawler, and his super also protects himself from assassins. Daryl is staying as an S tier brawler. Perhaps Gus's #1 teammate to throw a super on is Daryl. Daryl was instantly put into the S tier when he was able to roll twice, and his hypercharge, along with the current meta, has only made him better, even if it's not one of the best hypercharges in the game. Surge is staying in the S tier. Surge has become S tier since his hypercharge was released, and this meta has only made him better. He's honestly a great counter against aggressive brawlers, even at level 1, and past level 3, he is the best brawler in the game. Juju is starting out her career in...
Dun, 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 dun. Excuse me for a second. 1552. 1552. 15.
In the S tier. Unlike most of my tier lists in the past, we've actually been able to use Juju a lot before recording this video, and the pros unanimously agree that she is S tier, which I guess isn't a huge surprise. Turns out she's actually a very high skill cap brawler, and so she doesn't feel incredibly oppressive outside of the competitive meta, but she is very good competitively. Kenji is moving from the B tier up into the S tier, the third best brawler in the game. Kenji was not released the last tier list, and we quickly found out he was not B tier. He was absolutely so broken that even with the recent nerfs, he's still one of the best brawlers in the game. Mo is the second best brawler in the game, arguably the best, and he's staying in the S tier. Mo was also even more broken than we thought he would be after his nerfs, and he is still kind of broken. He needs more nerfs. He's really good. And at the very top, we are kicking off Shade's career. And this one was actually not decided by the pros. This was in collaboration with me and Moxie. Moxie's actually the semi-pro player who actually helped me compile all the pro players' feedback and put it into this tier list, so you know that this tier list is the best possible. He helps me with my update videos and has had extensive time to research and play Shade. At the time that I am filming this, Shade has not been released. By the time you're seeing this, he'll probably have been released. But also, the pros agreed that he's going to be the most broken brawler, like, out of all of the current brawlers. So I guess we can look forward to that, you know. Past Kairos has no idea how terrible it was. And that is every brawler in the game ranked from worst to best. Leave a comment below with what you agree with and what you disagree with and what really needs to happen to make the game more balanced. Also, if you share this with anybody, grab a screenshot. Hey, just make sure you don't crop my face out there and use code Kairos in the Brawl Stars shop. Once again, a massive thank you to all the pro players who helped make this possible. Their feedback was instrumental.
That's where we're gonna end this video. See you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.